Morning, everyone. Welcome to our Sunday special property chat again. Today, we don't have Jay starting it. Jay is taking a little time off to look after his daughter, and we're back with the mighty four: Ross, Helen, Adam. Morning, guys.
Morning, everyone.
Morning to everyone who's tuning in, and to those who possibly read Adam's Sunday supplement, and maybe not. But again, we'll start with a little update on what's in the Sunday supplement. What are we talking about today, Adam?
The cliff notes, if you will. Yes, absolutely. So I decided this week to take a bit of a different tack and talk about strategy and performance and allocating enough time to have some of those strategic thinking conversations. I borrowed a bit from an article I read some time back about what highly successful people do, and there's lots and lots of books about that. 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, etc., etc. But one of the bits in there was about 60 minutes a day of dream setting, which I think was badly worded, because I don't think it was really dream setting. I mean, you're not going to spend an hour a day revising your dreams from yesterday, realistically. It was more about the pursuit of goals, realistically. And maybe that's not as sexy and wouldn't get as many clicks, but Ross has been coaching me on my extremely dull social media this week, so we'll move on to that. We'll move on to that later on.
It's not your dull social media. Get it right. It was your dull social and delivery. It's just a one small factual element of it.
So that's what you get for not listening. My bad. So, although maybe you can understand why, it wasn't one of the great pep talks of modern times. Let's look at it that way. So I was reflecting on the fact that not really, and I've a lot of what I've written today comes from my own experiences and things that I've done in the past, and I've been fortunate enough to put myself in positions where I've been stretched and challenged based on what I've done in the past, and realised some of the mistakes that I've made hasn't stopped me from carrying on and making new mistakes, different mistakes, but it has enabled me to effectively learn from them and self-educate a little bit, and that includes on things like strategy. And when you're investing and you're using leverage and you're swinging a reasonably large bat around, which as soon as you buy a second property, what do people say about houses? They say it's the biggest purchase that you'll ever make. Most people will ever make. Well, if you then go on to build a portfolio or to become a developer and develop sites that you're going to sell, those again are bigger purchases. Not many developers live in a house more expensive than the GDV of their development, for example. It's very, very, very rarely happens. So you're swinging a very big bat around, and I think it's a pretty good idea to understand how much is skill, how much is judgment, how much is luck, how much is variance. I think people get a bit snarky when you use the word luck, because it's kind of implying that that it's happened to everybody. They couldn't have helped it. They couldn't have done this and that. And I tried to make a little bit of a separation today between being in the right place at the right time and making your own luck to an extent. And just, I prefer to call it variance, because sometimes it works with you, sometimes it works against you. And when it works with you, it's maximizing those sort of upside swings. I can see Helen smiling, because she knows that a lot of this is about being a good trader and having the right mentality. But also it's about controlling your own ego. If you have a project and it goes particularly well, good. I'm all up for celebrate. You run your winners, celebrate your winners, absolutely. But if you don't debrief, and we all have a tendency, but we'll debrief after one that's gone wrong, and we'll try and see what happened. But we won't debrief after one that's gone particularly well and work out what we might be able to do again in the future. And it's quite hard, because the sorts of deals that we all get involved in, and almost every property professional in many ways gets involved in, they are bespoke. There are similarities and there are differences. And it's sometimes hard. Sometimes I wish I could do a deal like that again. But that might not be a particularly healthy mindset, because the market might have moved on. That might have been a bit of a unicorn flashing in the pan. The real mindset, I think, is, find the overall strategy that you can take advantage of, and do so taking the least risk and making the most reward. That would be how I would frame it. So it talks about metrics a bit. It talks about gauging and judging performance, and I suppose the closest school of thought it's close to is probably like a Ray Dalio radical transparency kind of discussion, really, where there's nothing wrong with Helen always has the props perfectly placed. Have you got a sharp bookmark in there, Helen? That's the key.
So like from like just coming from that question, you just ask like on a question, but a statement of like we should all focus on like overarching thing that goes well, and keep doing that. So what's the kind of thing that you do in your businesses? Like it's a question to everyone. Like what's the one thing that you keep focusing on that's got that risk reward ratio, and it's the least risk for the return that you want to get?
So I can add I was going to say I can add a wee bit there, because some of the chat that I've had a certain bit of time was good. Some of the chat you see a wee bit more about how his brain works, and how I'm sure he's balancing all these fancy things like risk and returns and yields, and looks at it. But we went to see a development that I've been looking at quite close to where I live. It's about 20 kilometres away, and it looks really, in capital terms, it looks really cheap compared to the rest of this area. But in rental terms, it looks even cheaper. So when we spent about 20 minutes driving around, looking at things, analysing prices on the Dubai version of Rightmove, and at the end of it, Adam just said, look, I don't have enough information, but the two things the thing I can't get my head around is either overpriced in a capital value, even although it's the cheapest location you can buy in Dubai per square foot for a villa or a terraced house, and he said, or it's underpriced in rental. And we came to the conclusion it's not really investable because of its thing. But it was interesting, it was how fast Adam came to that conclusion. Probably in my head, I had the same idea. He had no knowledge we were going there half an hour before we went. But you could just see he has all these metrics in his head that he's just balancing and creating and thinking, this works, that works, seems a bit expensive. For a 5% yield, you'd be expecting a wee bit more. Supply and demand, he was basically just ticking it off as he goes through the whole thing. So for him, it's obviously just a system. And then I relate it back to some of the things that we bought and some of the things that we haven't bought back home, where quite a lot of the time he's like, yeah, we'll buy it because it does this, this and this, whereas I'm thinking, well, it's maybe not a good enough area, or it's not this, or it's not up and coming enough, or it's this or it's that. But he's always going back to make the numbers work, get enough information to make the numbers work, and if the numbers don't work, move on. So what goes into the Sunday supplement and what was in today, and I think you'll notice after the pep talk, Adam, that everybody said that's perhaps your best work to date. Now, I'm not taking any credit for it, but the internet has spoken. Really clever people on the internet have spoken. And obviously just a slight twist in direction has got you sailing the right way. No, but joking aside, you can see the stuff in play yesterday when we go to look at sites that he has no clue about, as in he's never been there, he's never been here, he's never been in this location, he has no idea what it is. There's no time to do lots of evidence, phone surveyors, find out from estate agents and see what the thing is. But quite quickly he got to the same solution, or quite quickly, 20 minutes, he gets to the same thing I'm thinking, that it's done. But it's because his whole thing is a process. It's not one thing that becomes a deal. It's this is the process in my head, and if I keep going with it and I keep doing it, as long as I do, what was the term she said the other day? Lisa's dad said something about if you can make it right 75% of the time, you're going to be a winner. And that's from Adam's stats, I would imagine it's going to be 90 or 95% of the time. But the process itself is what's generating this big portfolio of things that are throwing off money on a month-by-month basis, but also accumulating capital value. I know that didn't answer your question, Piotr, but I just thought it was it was seeing Adam in full flow, which was quite interesting.
Nice.
And the more you do of that, because I'm looking at slightly different things, but it's the same process. the more you're looking at it, the more it's just there. You're not even consciously thinking, oh, does that equate to whatever percent, or it's just, you just know. Somebody messaged me on LinkedIn yesterday or the day before about a deal. We've got this piece of land, it's this much, this is the GDV, and I just looked at it and I'm like, it's too expensive. Literally it's too expensive. Because you know from the price and the GDV, you can have a guess. I don't even know what they were building, but I can guess what the build cost would be. And I'm like, there's no margin in it. Therefore, the price you're asking is too high. And that's just from looking at this stuff incessantly, as Adam does with, the stuff that he buys.
The good thing about
that was the nice thing, Ross. I thought you were going to say it was the equivalent of dropping Samuel Leeds off in his underpants in a place he'd never been to before, but instead that's the nicest thing you've said about me all week, so thank you. Thank you.
The other thing is, we saw a camel grazing on sand at the side of the road as we drove past to the location. I don't know whether that was a factor in the whole thing or not.
It's a new metric I've developed since I've been here.
Camels involved.
Oh, nice one. Yeah, well, I mean, it's like when we look at things in auctions, like we tend to like just analyze things quickly, and but it's like the more you do, the quicker you analyze things, because you've seen things happening over and over. I mean, for us, like what we tend to focus on, obviously, it's like mostly paperwork things, like adding value through some paperwork. Like we don't like to get involved in like developments or even refurbishments. I know our cup of tea, because there's too many variables that we don't want to be handling. So we want to keep things as simple as possible. Plus, have a bit of, I don't know, like use our head more than our hands with the properties. So,
but it's exactly the same principle as Adam said. It's and you guys have a shorter time frame as well, which I definitely tend to these days, having been burnt by some developments. Actually, it's worth for anybody listening to Jay's, I was on it as well, but the point I'm making is Jay's interview with Will Mallard, where he talks about due diligence, and he talks you through the process that you guys look at. He looks at this, and if that's not right, then move on. So that's really worth a listen. It's like 20-30 minutes or something.
Yeah. There's lots of those podcasts that will, I think, get over 100 in like 3 months, right?
I know.
It's insane.
I think he does select the best people to go on the most times. I think I've seemed to have noticed that pattern.
Definitely.
Yes. Yeah,
Adam, you've got a statistic for that, haven't you? How many times have you been on?
Couldn't tell you, Ross. Couldn't tell you.
We told me Wednesday. Have you forgotten?
We'll need to sign an exclusivity deal with Adam for our Sunday special chat.
I think so. I think he says is it between 20 and 25% of Will's podcasts have been done with somebody called Adam Lawrence?
Not sure.
Oh, I might catch you up. I'm trying.
Adam didn't mention that.
Nice.
Got one planned for next week.
Brilliant. So, like in terms of like this looking at the strategic thinking and actually then implementing it, like Adam, like how do you handle the things that obviously like on paper things can work, but then how do you handle all the things that are like, I don't know, it's just like they cannot be, they're just like part of the business and things that might go wrong and stuff like that, because really that's what can break the strategic thinking, right? If you don't handle the things that need handling quickly, or like, I don't know, just
I think you're searching for that famous Mike Tyson quote, Piotr. Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? Yeah.
Yes, that one.
And property is like the ultimate field for that quote being very, very true. So I think you mentioned an interesting thing there about auction and the way that you approach auction and looking for paper value rather than wet work value or whatever you'd like to call it, improvement value. And I think it's interesting because that can work in two ways. So you can analyze anything to the nth degree as much as you want to. But from anybody who's ever been to try to buy what I would call an entry-level property in an auction, so looks like it should be on Homes Under the Hammer, let's say, right? And you will know almost certainly 95+% of those lots end up with you scratching your head going, well, how did they afford to pay that much? What's going on there, you know? And the problem is that there's lots of opportunities with all of those moving parts to make lots of mistakes, and people can make those mistakes on the downside in terms of the costs of the bits that can go wrong, which means they think they can pay more. Then there's also the errors in terms of controlling your own emotions and letting things like, and I mentioned it today as well, letting things like ego get in the way, letting things like, we've all seen people do things because they wanted someone else not to be able to do it, for example. I mean, there's no room for that in business realistically, but it happens every day. And it's a bit of a silly use of fairly negative energy, really. So you've got to think about things like that. I think the thing about doing the legal sides or the optimization of the paperwork side of things is what it normally does is it pushes people out because they just accept that they don't understand that. And in fact, probably further than that, they've probably got some limiting beliefs that keep them a little bit further away from being able to do a deal like that, which of course suits us largely down to the ground. But we always do a second pass when we've been through a catalogue, just to have a little bit of a bat around and say, do you know what, have we put that one to the side too easily? Because I always refer to them as sort of page turners back from the good old days where it was all paper. You know, I always think about them as page turners, where you've got a lot of data. What Ross was just talking about then, there's a lot of data. I'm asking a lot of questions. There's a lot of noise. I don't need all of that data. There's other data that I'd like to have, but I don't have it. Well, that is absolutely an auction situation, definitionally. You know, you'd like to know the real reason for the vendor selling the property, rather than either what the auction house staff are telling you or what the vendor has told the auctioneer, because obviously that might not be the case. So you've got to fill in those gaps. And as Helen was saying, that kind of Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule, or whichever sort of proxy you'd like to use, there is that mechanical process. You've been through it a number of times, but it's still worth just giving yourself a little, 20 seconds, 30 seconds to just think, okay, what might I have missed here? And we've picked up some great lots at auction when we've done that. Hold on a second, just tilt the camera to the left a bit. A lot of your chats, Piotr, that yourself and Jay and Rod and Ranjan and other guests and things that you guys have had on show really nicely the power of a team, because everybody tends to come at it in a slightly different way. And I think there's certainly in Facebook land, in social media land in general, there's definitely people I interact with who I know don't share my values and beliefs and all the rest of it, but they are useful. I actually sometimes don't really like talking to them. I try to make sure social media works for me rather than me working for social media. But so like negative emotion stuff, I tend to just sort of get away from it. But sometimes there are people who I just think, you know what, good things come out of interactions with that person, and it stretches me. I've got to go in with the right mindset. We're not going to go into business together. That's no issue. But it just pushes me backwards and forwards a bit. I think the gut feel, extremely powerful. The data-driven approach is extremely powerful. You've got to be mindful of all the weaknesses of all of those approaches, because, for example, we've all met lots of people in this game who've got analysis paralysis, and it's a big fat waste of time sometimes in the nicest possible way. And some people who will more like ready, fire, aim, which is more like my natural proclivities, and then sort of do it and then pick up the pieces later. So the way that I deal with that, because that's very much my inherent personality type, is if it's a big deal, or even if it's the smallest deal, really, I'm going to sleep on it. But even though I might have that the reverse of the feeling that Helen was describing earlier, I know it's a deal. I don't need to think about it too hard. It's all, but still, I think, you know what, my personality type needs me to go away and just breathe deep, think about it, wake up in the morning, and I'll know the answer. And look, 97% of the time, it's the same answer, but not 100. So it's a really worthwhile exercise, especially because we will get involved in lots of smallish deals that we're working quite hard to gain that extra bit of yield and everything else out of the deal. So your margins for error, I used to think that the very best developments were not much in terms of the land or the initial building purchase, and then a lot loaded into the development costs. And then the skill becomes very focused on controlling the development costs. So either you've got a building company, you know, that's where your skills are. Maybe you're going to spend a reasonable amount of time on the site itself, working in the site office or whatever. But of course, the problem with that is when you have a period like we've just had over the last 12 plus months, where prices are going up at the rate they are of materials and labour, if everything's loaded into the conversion value or the out the ground build value, then you've got a bigger problem, because 20% of 80% of your cost base is 60%, 20% of 40% of your cost base is 8%. So it makes a huge difference, you know. So it's by continually assessing both what happens on individual projects and what happens in the broader marketplace, and also that sort of feeling. Even the very most, I had a conversation with someone a few weeks ago. They said to me, that with a real bit of surprise on their intonation, they said, "You're quite risk averse, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah, I'm quite significantly risk averse. Yeah, absolutely. But I've learned from people I've met who have a lower risk appetite than I do, the ones who've been successful, what I've noted from them is that they have this ability to flick a switch to say, right, it's time to do this. It's time to go. We're going ahead with this one to get through so they've done all the work that they want to do. They're ready to make the decision. They make the decision and they stick with it realistically whilst controlling the downside. So it's trying to learn bits and bobs like that in this situation as well, really, I suppose. So there's a bit of a typical Adam Lawrence broad brush scattergun answer there, I'm afraid, but there's a few snippets of sort of how my mind thinks about those things, really, Piotr.
Yeah, nice one. That's
a lot of it is like self-awareness that you're talking about, and actually that's why Ray, our friend Ray, is so good, because he talks not only kind of strategy and understanding that, but he's so big on the people, on the human element side of things as well. And actually what you've been talking about is being aware of your biases. And actually Manish Kataria has done a really good article in Property Investor News this month, kind of talking about that and being aware of there's many different biases. And unless you're aware of those and your propensity for one or the other, then exactly you can just get set in that you know, kind of that just very narrow view of things. Well, this is the way I do it, and this is what, you know, like I'm the same. Like I think of myself as very risk averse, but you also have to be to what you were just saying at the end there. You also have to kind of open wide and like, well, when is the appropriate time for that, and how much risk, and that can be tweaked, you know, with other things like, actually, I'll take a bit more risk on this because I'm not putting as much money in. So yeah, let's go for that. But you have to be aware of how you do things, and then exactly like you say, like take other perspectives as well, whether you agree with them or not. They are thought-provoking, right?
Absolutely. And it might not be this time that they come to pass, but they'll be useful for the future. I mean, amusing story from when I did my MBA. The guy who was our behavioural science lecturer, I haven't mentioned it for 25 minutes, so I thought, you know, in case John Cox is watching, we'll just throw it in there. But the guy who was our behavioural science lead professor was a guy called Daniel Reed, very well thought of American tens of thousands of citations, has done things with the FCA, the nudge unit at governmental level for the FCA, all this sort of stuff. Really, really great guy. And he was the only professor throughout the whole of the course who returned our pieces of work back late. And he was about 2 days late. And he sent an explanatory note with them. And he said, sorry, guys, I was over optimistic about the amount of time it would take me to mark these. Now, obviously, 50% of that is tongue in cheek, but his whole point throughout a lot of the course was just because you know about it doesn't mean that you will deal with it. So you need to actively manage those things. And I think that's really a very good thing that people could take away from today, is that it doesn't necessarily go away. It's sort of elongating your thought process in a way, like you say, through self-awareness of, I'm likely to be too impetuous. I'm likely to give away a bit too much. I'm likely to do this, that, or the other. And then some people it will be, I'm likely to be too negative. I'm likely to over-emphasize the probability of this or happening. You know, you can talk yourself out of investing in property every day, 10 times a day, if you want to. And the media will support whichever negative viewpoint you want to put into your own head. So there's an awful lot of that. I mean, a real good example at the moment, I think, is around the cost of living stuff and all the rest of it. You do need to be quite cautious with a lot of the stuff that's going on. And I think one of the ways to do that we've all got access to is look at your own household budget and where the pinch points are and what's really going on. And also look at what you've got up to over the last couple of years, when really there should have been a near economic meltdown. And ultimately there really hasn't been. And I dare say we're probably all likely better off than we were 24 months ago. So there's always a bit of pain that has to come through at some point in these situations. But how bad is it really versus what it's saying in everything from the Guardian to the New Statesman or whatever? You know, you just need to take to the Spectator. You need to take a broad brush approach to these things, and this is why I like dealing with source data, because it doesn't have an agenda. So, that's what I was saying to Rob yesterday. You know, I want more data. Feed me more data. Because then I can be sure. You know, more sure of trying to get it right. Really.
So showing you 2.5 camels wasn't enough data.
Either three camels rule. 3 camels.
That was my dowry. What's interesting about this is, I think as you grow and you start to scale up a wee bit, where you're talking about looking into yourself and seeing where your own problems lie, your own expectations and how you deal with things, as you start to scale up, it's about surrounding yourself with people who you can draw on their mentalities and the differences in how they operate to how you operate. So for me, I embarked on the route maybe 7 years ago, and it was a conscious decision to move away from Scotland, to move to England, to find a group of like-minded people, 3 of whom who are on here, to find people that you can share information with, that you can trust, that you can do all these things, but also to find people who don't just take from you, but can give back. So I know that if I'm analysing something or doing something, I can phone Adam, or I can phone Rod, or I can speak to you guys, or we can talk about it Sunday morning. So it becomes your kind of social circle within this property stuff becomes a place where you can find balancing views. And I bought quite a lot of things where it's not really been my bag, but I am a buyer of things. I like trading. So I'm always of that. I want to create more deals than I've got money for, is always my view of it. But quite a lot of the time, with other things I haven't quite thought it through. Other people have said, yeah, but it might be good for this. I think Dominic's put a post on how Jane Piot teach the idea of, if it's got a second exit and a third exit, it becomes a good thing to do. That's the way I've always lived my life. If you can find multiple exits for something, it doesn't really matter. If you're buying at the right price, you know you're going to get rid of it somehow. But the other thing is you start to grow bigger than enough for one person to do. And I've got, I don't know, maybe 120 or 130 staff over a variety of different businesses now. But it's getting people to work with you who don't necessarily share the same viewpoint. It doesn't make choppy waters very easy. It doesn't. It creates lots of discussions, but the positivity around it is that at the end of those discussions, you then are getting that different viewpoint to balance your own. So quite a lot of the time, other people are making better decisions. Well, certainly for me, better decisions. They are more educated in certain areas, so you can take external professional advice. But as I say, I've got to the point where quite a lot of my staff, they're doing that before it even gets to me. So I'm now getting deals brought to me, situations brought to me. This is what we think we should have done, and this is how we've dealt with it, or this is the problem, this is how it's dealt with, this is something you should have bought. And I pulled rank last week. I bought a shop. Guy's in a tricky situation. He borrowed money from people he shouldn't have 2 years ago. Business has now gone bust. These people want the money back. Horrible situation to be involved in. And of course, it came to me, and eventually, you're going to buy this, you're going to pay this price for it. And it was a fantastic deal because the guy needed quick cash. We were in a position to do it. And so because of the way our businesses are focused, we're trying to buy things at the lowest possible price. But the guy pulled back on a couple of occasions from going to see his lawyer, trying to do the deal, all these things that were just red alerts for me that this is not right. And I had to go back and say, look, I think we've underpriced the deal even with what we're offering, and we put another £10,000 on it, and then that's the deal gone through. And I think if it didn't settle on Friday afternoon, it settles on Monday. So where I found that I've benefited by training people and getting them into the mindset of this is what we offer and this is how we do it, there are points you just want to be in control of that final decision, to be basically say, well, we gave the guy 10 grand more but bought £150,000 shop in the centre of Glasgow for 90,000. It's still a good deal. Just because the guy said he would take 80 for it doesn't necessarily mean that's all you need to offer them. It's just it's finding the right point.
And it's flexibility, what you're talking about. And I think we've it's been kind of an underlying theme of everything, like all of us have said there. You have your parameters or your kind of guidelines, but they're not set in stone. They're not like, this is it categorically. And yes, you probably need some of that when you have bigger organizations or more companies, as you're saying, Ross. But actually, there does need to be a little bit of flexibility. And perhaps that's exactly what your role is, as you've said.
You know, my favourite bit to throw on that would be the Warren Buffett's rule, isn't it? You know, he openly says sometimes his last rule is sometimes you break the rules, and it's the timing, and so it's what Ross has just described probably is the systemization of how to analyze the deal and bring it up to the surface. But sometimes, do you know what? Sometimes you still have to do this or that, and that is the element that I guess means that there's still that final level of skill. And also the art of good delegation, in that, you know, 100 hours work has gone in to leave you with 15 minutes to do, and that 15 minutes is still where the money will be won and lost ultimately, which is a good system below you.
Yeah.
I think the volume of deals is another thing I would say that often impacts on whether you do a deal or don't do it, or whether I do a deal or don't do a deal. If we bought 6 houses this week, buying the 7th isn't quite that important. If I've not bought any houses for the last 3 weeks, buying the 7th, and that very often has a bearing on whether you buy something or whether I buy something that's marginal or not. But it's interesting. It's been really interesting with Adam and Rod this week. We're looking at disposing of something, big chunky portfolio that's worth a lot of money. There's a bit of interest in it. And again, watching how, probably I'm closer to Adam in this because he's been with me, that how he and Rod have analysed what's been happening, how the deal's been done. I'm quite black and white. Well, do we want to keep it or do we not? And what's the best price we can get? Whereas Adam had analysed it all through. I think I mentioned this last week, and had said if we get this, we do this, we do this. And Rod had a different analysis for it, but it was pretty much at the same point in time and the same number. So it just shows that the people you're dealing with are actually using different products, different systems, different levels of organisation. You can then see the buyers coming to us. They're analysing the way both Adam and Rod are, because the figures are all very similar, which is quite a good thing.
It's a good point, because obviously we have a little bit of that in Boardroom Club, and Rod and I are both very keen to sort of be quite clear on the fact that we won't necessarily think the same way about something. Now, we might come to the same conclusion, we might not. And really, that's really what we're trying to impart to people, that we want them to get out of it. It's the old, you know, we can give people fish all day, right? But that's no use to them because they're not going to be in the club forever. We want them to be able to move on and be ready to make those decisions themselves and find those people who can push them into a different corner to see how they fight out of it, and then do that again. And then they can make much, much better decisions about, high ticket items at the end of the day. Like you say, Ross, you can make, even in an entry level in property, the decisions you're making are going to be 6-figure decisions one way or another, and stuff's at risk if you get stuff wrong. And you go through and suddenly there's 7-figure decisions one day, and you approach the point towards they get to be 8-figure decisions. That's a big deal for one human being to process, and that's why, when you see people who've got, especially big creative businesses, a lot of their time is spent on housekeeping themselves and their brain, and making sure that they're well looked after so that they're in the right sort of shape to be able to, apart from anything else, to be able to handle it. Because obviously, if you stop and think for a while, I always liken it to watching. I've always been a big fan of. I played poker to a reasonable standard 20 years ago, but I actually enjoy it much more as a spectator sport these days. And so I watch quite a bit in my trash TV downtime will involve watching like poker podcasts or people play games of poker. Because the thought process that people go through, and we're in a different world now where you can listen to a podcast and someone can break down exactly why someone's done what they've done, and then the person who's made the decision can say, "I didn't do any of that," but they came to the same conclusion, and they can see where they're coming from, and that's very much like property, and as well, because poker can be all about numbers if you want it to be. And you can be a winning poker player who only cares about probability and stuff like that. It can also only be about people if you want, and behavioural biases and what Helen was talking about earlier. Or it can be a hybrid of the two. Or, of course, there's other approaches as well. Sometimes people do things they don't know how they do them, maybe because they've done their 10,000 hours, Helen, and they just, by heuristics, they know they've been in that situation before. They don't need to overthink it, and I would liken that to the developer who's been doing it 30, 40 years, who just, someone like a Richard Little, who is just, but one of Richard's great skills is that he can also describe and enunciate that, but also one of his great skills is his self-awareness, because you see when he writes, it's so expansive, just a pleasure to read. He's someone who genuinely brings out emotion in me when I read some of his posts, because I just think it's just spectacular, and that really, that is with the he also talks a bit about balance and lifestyle and stuff like that. That really is the final level. There isn't a lot beyond. He's like a ninth Dan in my world of property or business people, because to do any more you need to go and do 4 years fasting in Okinawa in order to self-flagellate every day or whatever in order to reach the 10th level. I thought I'd bring the tone down because Jay's not here today, you see. We're 38 minutes in. So.
Nice one. Well, I think it's like one of the things that allows us to like come up with things quite quickly and analyze things quite quickly is like to follow like what happens with properties we either were involved with or we're looking at. And I just want to say one thing about this, because I was looking at this a couple of days ago at the Park Avenue Muse kind of thing, what happened there. And it's like I just open Fleet Apps and I'll share it just so that people know what we are talking about. Let me just see, how do I share this on this thing? Share screen. Okay, and so you might recall when we bought this thing. No, I can't share the screen. Unlock the screen. Wow.
Whole new level of techie here.
I don't think G's here, is he?
I was I'll tell you what I was going to say though, Piotr. I think one of the things that you're particularly good at in the context of all of this is understanding what other people are going to do with relative clarity, and it comes to you quite simply. You are just like, this is going to go to here or here or here, and part of the sort of breaking up of lots and some of the stuff that Omer has done, for example, is to say, and this sort of from in our world pertains back to what we've seen and what we knew from day one when we got involved in the Genesis Centre. You know, you wouldn't put a sports hall with a bowling alley, with function facilities, with a 300-person bar. It just doesn't, with a soft play and a cafe. Some of that makes symbiotic sense. Some of it makes no sense whatsoever. So from day one, we kind of knew what you need to do is break some of that stuff up and find individual operators to operate it, because you're only going to get a person come in and say, well, that's not big enough. We don't want this bit. We don't want that. And then that means, you know, obviously you're getting chipped quite significantly on the price. So your understanding of what people will, you know, who's in the market for that? Why does it sit there? Why does it need to be priced like that? Even down to why do the CGIs need to look like that? You know, and that's a very, it's difficult because you might be spending £100 on some CGIs that might be worth £10,000, £25,000. Even more on the price. It reminds me of the old. I used to love reading Paul Ribbon's stuff when he used to write a bit more years ago, and the old trick of the graffiti on the floor of the property, what the new floor plan should look like. So it's not an architect's drawing, but it hits you in the first room on the way in that this is how you could do it. And so it's kind of feeding people the answer and then letting them make the leap of faith to, we better buy this. This has got, I never thought of doing that. You know, it's brilliant, really brilliant.
Thank you. That's nice to hear. I mean, it's like, I think that's a key thing with selling anything in the auction, or looking at, and also looking how people behave in auctions, I guess. But like this development of us, like I was looking at the actual end product that the developer created. I can't actually share the screen, but and yeah, it looks really great on Rightmove. And each house, basically the guy created 8 houses there on that little site that, I mean, we owned only part of it, but each house is selling for 375. So there's like 2.8 million GDV on a site that was basically purchased for like 400k in total, like for the whole thing. And but it's great to see the whole process from start to finish. And that's what we tell people all the time, like if you don't win something, just see what happens with it after 6 months. Like just type it on Rightmove and go to the planning portal, see what someone has done with it. Because like you might go to all those workshops and courses and stuff like that, but they're only as valuable. Like you can learn so many things from people actually doing this stuff, and then you can get to know who the planning consultant was. You can get to know everything from like the real life data rather than the kind of prepared stuff in your workbook or something you get in the course you pay lots of money for. Like courses and workshops are valuable, but only to the point. And there's a real life stuff that needs to go on. So
that's it. You have to execute. You have to execute, and it's very much a people game and an operational game, which is quite a challenge. And that's why the old, if it was easy, everyone would do it, right? That's the thing. You know, there's
So for those people that are watching, I've got a challenge. That if you lost out on a deal or something in the last, I don't know, 6 months, a year, like go back to it today, tomorrow, or like this week, and just basically follow what happened with it, and let us know what you came up with next week. That'll be good too. It'll be a good social experiment.
That's a great shout. And if anybody goes back and finds out it's back on the market and then they buy it, then you owe Piotr a drink.
Oh, that is funny.
It's a good shout.
Brilliant. Okay, what else we cover?
Well, there was one thing I was gonna throw in today that I thought was interesting. We had a brief chat about this yesterday. Mr. Sunak's wife and her voluntary tax donation, I suppose, is the only thing you could call it. I made a comment under the BBC article that they shared about it, saying either this is, one incredibly refreshing piece of, and this isn't really either or, to be honest, I framed it as that. Either it's a really refreshing piece of thinking, or it's worth more money to their family, him being the Chancellor of the Exchequer, than not. And maybe that's a bit cynical, but for those who don't know, she's got non-dom status. She doesn't need to pay tax on income earned outside of the UK. There was about, I think, 12 or 13 million pounds worth of dividends in a significant shareholding she's got in an Indian company. And so there would have been a few million quid's worth of tax due if she wasn't a non-dom. But she is, and she's volunteered to pay that tax in order not to compromise his job. So when you think about it, with his MP salary, with the enhancement of being the Chancellor, even if you added his expenses onto all of that, there's probably not 500 grand a year there. They paid what, 3-4 million in tax on that sum of money, so they're currently paying for the privilege of him being the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Now, I think that's pretty ridiculous in many ways, because I think, apart from anything else, this debate comes up usually about this time of year every year, in that MPs are getting paid not enough or too much. No one ever tends to say it's probably about right, but if you look at the international comparisons, our MPs get paid really poorly compared to a lot of other countries in the world. Really poorly compared to Germany, really poorly, when you could say, compared to a lot of the EU stuff that goes on, because the accountability structure is somewhat different. And what does that mean? Does it mean you don't get people who are, is Sunak an absolute unicorn who will do it because, he feels strongly that he's the best person for the job, which, to be fair, he's pretty much evidenced for me at most points over the last couple of years. Or is there a global cabal behind the whole thing, pulling strings, saying, yes, keep Sunak in that job, it's useful for us to influence the Chancellor of the Exchequer? Or is there another thing going on? I just thought it was when Ross and I chatted about it, Ross said he thought it was a very quick and classy way of shutting down the debate, which I certainly did think that. Yeah. I think it was highly effective. And the people who hate the billionaire class or whatever, which unfortunately in the UK is the vast majority of them, nothing will ever be good enough anyway. So what's the point? I mean, it's a bit thought provoking. It's a bit saddening, really, and it makes you think. Well, no wonder, why would you expect that people would be politicians? What do you expect for 20 or 30 years down the line? They even have a relatively high death rate in the job, and that's not just what's happened over the past few years. That's been going on since the IRA and since before the IRA. I mean, there's a lot of reasons. I like my stats and my data, right? We've established that today. There's a lot of reasons not to want to do the job. And one being told off because of your wife's tax status. I always have the same thoughts in these situations. Don't hate the player, hate the game. The UK controls more tax havens than anywhere in the world. It's the last great legacy of the empire, right? The Crown dependencies, the Caymans, the Channel Islands, the this, the that. There's a big old raft of them, So, what do they say? Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. I think that's probably the appropriate biblical phrase at this point. So I just wondered what you guys thought about that, because I'm a bit torn. I'm maybe overly cynical, but I'm a bit torn.
I think naivety for me. I just wonder how somebody can get to be Chancellor of the Exchequer, and people within the Conservative Party haven't analysed that this could have been a problem, and perhaps they did, and they just haven't done anything about it. But you'd imagine if this is a country that's being run by these people, it does make their thinking seem quite limited. If Adam Lawrence had been in and about that, you'd have been analysing all these risks years and years ago to say, well, if he becomes Chancellor, she needs to pay her tax, otherwise we have got something that can come back against us. I find it quite naive, to be honest.
I think you're right about that. That's a really clever way to just shut it down. They don't want a Boris Partygate going on, and then there's more digging, and more stuff comes out 3 months later. So, I mean, now, well, that takes my mind to, I wonder what else is in there. Because if they've shut it down this quickly, they clearly do not want any more digging going on. So, someone go and dig.
There was an argument, though, this morning I read, and I can't remember where I read it, but there was an argument this morning suggesting that the greatest beneficiary out of Sunak coming under pressure is Boris himself, because it takes away the one credible opposition leader, or one credible person that could take his job. And in a time when we're at war, possibly Partygate gets swept under the carpet because of that. So he released the stats. Don't know.
That feels like an Occam's razor kind of solution, though, doesn't it? Really, yeah.
Absolutely. I was going to say I was a bit disappointed there, Adam, when you said that the one thing you immediately thought when it was all going through your head is why you hadn't married Rishi Sunak's wife. But hey ho.
wrong place, wrong time, Steve, unfortunately.
Fair enough.
You know, when I was at Oxford, George Clooney's wife was in my year reading law. So, and my girlfriend at the time was a lawyer, but not a male, unfortunately. So again, I try not to have too many regrets, Ross. But you know what might have been. You know, it is what it is.
I did go out with a member of the cabinet at Oxford. So.
Yeah.
So I missed my own opportunity there.
What, to assassinate them or to?
He was a really nice guy, actually. Then.
But you'd be declaring your income in Malta, wouldn't you?
Oh, of course.
Non-dom.
Okay. Well, I don't really follow too much of this politics because it's it's a bit of a time drain because it's like it's been going on. People have all sorts of opinions all the time, and when I look at it, it does bring nothing to the basically way we would run the business or we do things. So I tend to stay away from even commenting on things like this.
I'd describe myself as a voyeur, Piotr. That's how I'd look at my own. Have we got any comments from people or anything, any questions or anything like that, Piotr?
There's a few. Let's see. There is it's one from Dominic saying he loved the Will Manor presentation with Adam Lawrence. That Will wasn't even there.
I'd said to Will I was going to do a video and I couldn't think of what to call it, so I put something like Adam Lawrence live without Will Mallard.
Love that.
But we mentioned this already. Ross, I think, mentioned that the 3 things that we say to people normally: consider 3 exits. And if the third exit still works, it's a goer. Don't be greedy and leave some meat on the bone for others. Yeah, that's. I
think one of the big problems that you see, especially in times like this where stock is short, is that there is limited meat on the bone, and that's where people start to struggle a little bit because they start to force deals. There's a different incentive at the moment for deploying cash if you're sitting on cash, and again it comes back to, rather than listening to the press too much, it comes back to putting things into context and just being a master of your own figures realistically. But at the moment, when inflation hits 10%, whatever, people are going to be thinking, "Oh my God, I've got to get this money out the door." And the only thing I would say, broken record that I am on this subject, is that Uncle Warren says return of investment before return on investment. So remember that one forever, but for the next 12 months, seriously, front of mind stuff, because, you know, deploy at haste, repent at leisure. I'm sure that's slightly bastardized, but it's worth thinking about.
Yep, there's a comment from Guy saying we have to give people ideas. Experience allows us to look at other angles that other might miss.
Yeah, I think it's a good one. I mean, I couldn't tell you how many things Ross and I have ever batted around. I mean, we've only known each other about 7 years, and the number of different ideas that we would have discussed would be in the hundreds, if not the thousands, you know, and that's a small-ish chunk of both of our Venn diagrams, if you like, where we discuss things with other people or are turning things around in our own head and thinking about stuff like that. And ultimately, that boils down to a lot of what property is about, or a lot of what business is about, really. There's a very high failure rate of these things. So part of the skill comes a little bit back to the auction catalogue and being able to move on from things relatively quickly when you know they're not there. But then maybe just occasionally, just like a good lead, just like what you're saying, you know, if you bid on something and lost it 6 or 12 months ago, go and see what's happened to it now. Really, you should be following those things up anyway all the time. And ideas that we've had are also similar. There's kind of a pipeline approach to all of that sort of stuff. And you might have an idea that morphs into, I mean, I know Ross has got a business today that was an idea that went all the way around the clock sort of thing before it came back to somewhere near roughly where it started. And I think most things are like that, really. That's why I don't really, I'm not in love with the phrase property entrepreneur, because there's very few real groundbreaking things done in property. You're ultimately talking about shelter. You're ultimately talking about, you know, one of the basic human needs. So what the entrepreneurial bit is, for me, is taking things from other big businesses, learning lessons from elsewhere, learning things from talking to people and deals that they're doing and developments, flips and trades and things that they're doing, and turning that into a value proposition. I put in the supplement this week about Apple. I'm a big fan of like what they've done across the spectrum, because the iPhone, not to denigrate the achievement of the greatest selling product of all time, but really they didn't really invent much at all. They took the stuff and they put it together. And the operating system bit is really, the user experience is the genius. All the rest of the stuff had been invented elsewhere. It's all been done elsewhere. It was just the way they put it together that was clever. Whereas then the iPad was a different kettle of fish, because not so much on the tech front, but the whole Steve Jobs idea of, you don't know you need this stuff, but you will want it when I produce it. Now, there's not many people that takes a real entrepreneur to think and talk and action, even at a company that at the time was having a great deal of success, because it could have been like a mega flop, you know, it could have been. And instead it was an absolutely groundbreaking piece of work. I think even the iPod, you know, similarly, there was plenty of much cheaper, different stuff going on. And the first ones weren't really that cool, as I recall. Anyway, they were pretty bulky, clunky, pretty naff things. You could get smaller and more workable ones, but it worked. It worked. They found a way to understand the user's value proposition better than anybody did. And I think a lot of that, not the direct comparisons, but the thought process and the methodology, I find really, that's why I like reading case studies about big businesses, and Harvard Business Review is great and stuff like that, because you might pick one little nugget out, and it might be, you know, in your micro operation compared to someone like Apple, but it just gets the juices flowing, and it fits in quite well with this week's subject matter, I think.
Nice one. There's a comment from I Am Crypto on Property Sisters channel. Can you post the link to Jay's interview with Will Wallach? Where can those be found? Is it on the Facebook group, or is it some?
Yeah, it's my property world, but we'll post the link. But there's a Facebook group, My Property World, or if you look up any of the podcast channels, My Property World, it'll be there. But we'll stick the link in as well.
Yeah, and there will be things if you go to Facebook, Mara's profile or Jay's profile, all those podcasts will be linked somewhere there.
Yeah, it's on my profile too. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, it's a comment from Mark. Do you think property rents in London will follow recent rises in Londonisation rents and also during the inflation and costs? And then as a follow-up, because capital investment prices of commercialization have gone up in London recently.
It's a really good question. I think there's a couple of ways to go about answering it. Number one, I would be probably keen to relatively disassociate commercial and residential rents, generally speaking, because two different markets moving in two different cycles at two different times. And then the other side of it is, are we talking about rents going up or are we talking about values going up? Because yields are changing, yields have been changing, and with probably the biggest risk to bond yield volatility in recent times going on at the moment. I mean, you can look at what's happened to the US government bond rate since the Federal Reserve really sort of hardened their hawkish tone. These things can change massively. This is what I've said before about commercial. If you've got a commercial property where it's, and we've seen this in industrial, for example, in recent years, the yields have been tumbling, so the capital values have been scooting through the roof. But when you've got stuff in London, as you do have, where the money might be 3% yield, for example, if that goes to 2.5% yield or 3.5% yield, that's a very, very significant change in the capital values. The rent would go up 10%, but if the yield walks 25% the wrong way, you've still lost money overall. And then depending on your financing structure and things like that, that might cause you a problem from a covenant perspective. So it's such a broad question. It's quite difficult to answer. I mean, office, I've been relatively bearish on office, probably unreasonably so, but I don't think that I'm not massively keen on breaking into the office sector right now because I see a bit of long to medium term pain from hybrid working and stuff like that. At the moment, they're just using all this extra space to social distance and things like that. How long will that requirement /want last? I don't know. Obviously, there's many businesses that are very married to their London flagship commercial efforts. But if the employees don't want to play ball, it's causing some havoc around the world with certain companies and certain sectors with what staff want to do and things like that. If we're talking about retail, it's probably seen its worst, hasn't it? I would think at this point, it's not a bad time to be getting stuck into it if you can fund it, if you can find it. People can't be bothered with it, and the big investment houses where they had big retail investments behaving like long duration bonds, they don't see it like that anymore. It's problematic for them. So there's probably more sellers than buyers of that stuff. That's not a bad market to be looking at. But of course, there's tons of other commercial style property we could cover as well. Leisure's done really well the last 6 to 9 since the great reopening or whatever. Will that continue? Well, if there's a cost of living squeeze, which there's no doubt that there is one going on, it's just how deep and how long it will last for. Will that affect people's disposable income? Well, definitionally, it will affect their disposable income. What does that then mean for hospitality? What does it mean for leisure? Tougher times than they've had in the last 9 months, probably, you would think, just as the VATs kick back in at 20%. So let's see. But obviously, some have still got 50% off their business rates for the next year as well. So there's still a few things going on. That's not really covered all commercial bases either. But so yeah, that's a bit of a sit on the fence answer, isn't it? Really, but I think you've got to with a question like that, to be honest.
Cool. That is a pretty comprehensive answer for 5 minutes, quite condensed. Brilliant. Okay. Well, it's I think it's 10 past almost 11. I think let's come back next week and continue and answering the questions and basically chatting about new things. So, guys, let us know how the challenge goes. If you discovered anything about those properties you that didn't follow up on yet, or you will follow up on. And anything else to add before we wrap up?
Nothing more from me.
Let us know how it goes.
All right, thanks everyone for interactions, and I will see you all next week. And thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.